Have you heard about Berachain yet? It's the latest L1 that is taking DeFi by storm. And in just 2 months since launch, it has already accrued more TVL than Base, Arbitrum, and many other chains that have billions more in market cap than this new chain that has just showed up on the scene. Maybe you've heard of it. Maybe you even try to ask a friend, what is Berachain and why is everyone talking about it? That's exactly what I did with my friend Beary Bendito, who's basically become a true Berachain degen at this point. And here's how that went.
What am I doing in Berachain?
Yeah.
Stacking BTT, getting exposures to more BGT through LSTs, boosting validators, staking those LSTs to earn triple-digit APRs, farming for more triple-digit APRs and points on airdrops, lending, borrowing, supplying on Dolomite, earning 40% on my Bera, borrowing about 60% LTV, looping that into more farms, more exposure to V3-3 mechanics like on Beradrome,
voting on governance stuff, cross-chain swaps from other ecosystems, exiting those ecosystems to Berachain through Shogun, smart routing swaps through Ooga Booga.
What are you talking about? Yeah, that is a honeypot full of information, and I came out more confused and overwhelmed than I went in before I asked him what Berachain was. Now, if you've ever felt that way, don't worry, you are in the right place. Upon the advice of my friend Beary Bendito, I decided to do some digging myself, dive in and do some research. In this video, I'll be covering 3 key insights. 1, what is Berachain? I'll be sharing what is proof of liquidity and why it should matter to you. So let's dive right in. So let's start off by understanding what exactly is this chain named after a bear, Berachain, in an industry where bear and bull are basically the 2 polar opposites, and being bullish is considered typically very positive. So why would somebody name their chain Berachain in a market where being bearish is typically considered to be very negative? So Berachain, first from a technical standpoint, is an EVM-based, EVM-compatible layer 1 on its own. It is not an L2 on Ethereum. It is its own independent chain, but it is EVM-compatible. Now, on top of that, it is trying to solve a very critical problem in DeFi. It's a DeFi-focused chain looking to solve the problem of liquidity and TVL on chains that actually help facilitate the building of ecosystems. So we're going to dive into how they do that with their proof of liquidity model, Trinity system of tokens, and so much more. So from a technical standpoint, Berachain is an EVM compatible layer 1 chain. It is not an Ethereum L2, it is an independent chain, and that is looking to solve some very specific problems that relate to yield and capital efficiency, problems that relate to liquidity, and they do that utilizing multiple mechanisms such as proof of liquidity and their Trinity system of tokens. So we're going to dive into all that, but before we do, let's kind of understand a bit of how they came about. So this is a chain that launched just about 1.5 to 2 months ago. So it is not very old from a mainnet and chain launch standpoint, but it's a project that has been around in the conversations building since about 2021. It has gone through multiple transitions, and we'll cover those in the story of Berachain. If you're interested in a deep dive of that story, let me know in the comments and I'll make sure to make a video describing that as well. So the team has been around through multiple markets, cycles, bear and bull cycles. And what they've done essentially, long story short, is that they've fudded themselves into success. The whole concept of Berachain is to flip the bearish and bullish concept. If you go to Berachain's site, it actually loads on the bottom, typically size load at the top, and you scroll down. So they flipped even that simple concept where you scroll from the bottom of the site up. Now, this is very interesting because the whole culture, instead of saying GM for good morning as you do in crypto, you say BM for bear morning. And you acknowledge something, you say Ooga Booga. You know, they say when is it change shipping, and they always say it's going to ship in Q5. And Q5 obviously is not a real thing. So they have essentially adopted a culture of just being silly, having a really fun culture of having a great time, whether the market is bearish or bullish. And while doing that, they've actually developed some really, really interesting technologies that are absolutely game-changing for the space, which is why you see them already having more TVL than Base, Arbitrum, and many other chains that are billions in market cap, higher than the market cap of Berachain at this current point. So with that, why don't we dive into the next topic, which is their key component of solving the liquidity and yield efficiency problems. And they solve that with a concept called proof of liquidity. Man, this is confusing. Let's go back. Okay, so we're going to dive into proof of liquidity and understand what it is in simple terms. But before we dive too deep, let's take a second to understand the most common consensus framework, proof of stake, which is utilized by Ethereum, EVM compatible chains at large, and many other chains in the crypto ecosystem. Proof of stake essentially is a system that enables folks to be able to acquire the native gas token of that chain. In many cases, like for example, in the case of Ethereum, that would be ETH. And then they can choose to become a validator for Ethereum by staking the minimum amount of tokens required to become a validator. And as they do that, then they can get chosen to propose blocks. They're chosen to propose those blocks, and those blocks are approved and secured. Then they emit rewards in ETH, so they earn those ETH rewards. So essentially, you stake a certain amount of ETH to help secure the network. You run a node in order to secure the network as well. As you are chosen to propose a block, then you earn the reward as a result of helping secure that network in the ETH token. The problem with this approach has been historically that there is no direct incentive and connection with the folks that are securing the chain to the folks that are building applications, ecosystems, and platforms on the chain and their users. These are two entirely separate parties until proof of liquidity was introduced by Berachain. So you may ask, why are they two separate parties? Because the flywheel, so to say, of validation and chain security is self-sustaining in proof of stake ecosystems. A validator does not need to do anything else in order to justify their time and capital efficiency. They can simply take the ETH, stake it, run their node, take the rewards, sell those rewards, take profits, and repeat that system. They have no reason to allocate that ETH into the liquidity pools on Ethereum, into the ecosystem on Ethereum to support application development. They have no reason or incentive to do that. Let's take a look at this Wajahat video where he talks about how with over 300 chains on DeFi Llama, 70% of them at this point have less than $10 million in TVL, and 80% of them have less than $50 million in TVL. In other words, they're ghost chains. So let's take a look at him explaining exactly that and showing that in the video here.
There's like 300 plus chains on here, and you don't have to go very far before you've got chains less than 50 million in TVL. In fact, 80% of the chains that are currently on DeFi Llama have a TVL of less than 50 million. And in fact, if you scroll down a little bit more, 70% of all the chains that are on DeFi Llama right now have less than 10 million TVL.
Yeah, shout out to Wajahat for making that great video. You definitely want to follow him if you don't already. He's got great content in the Berachain space. But this problem, it continues to be a problem of essentially rented security and stake centralization. And these problems are core to proof of stake because they completely segregate the chain security layer with the chain operation layer, so to say, where community, the builders, and the holders operate. So how do you solve that? That's what proof of liquidity aims to solve. What they've done with Berachain and proof of liquidity is essentially they've combined the interest of the chain security individuals and audience with the chain operation audience of protocol builders, of holders, and of the community. How have they done that? Until I dove into the white paper and realized how much of a flywheels everywhere, and I'm not joking you. They've introduced a trinity system of tokens that has its unique purposes and that completely connects all of these different communities and stakeholders. So for example, in the case of Berachain, there is a Bera token, which is utilized for transaction fees and for staking to run a validator node. There is a BGT token, which is the Berachain governance token used for governance and for reward emissions for the validators, for the ecosystem at large. And then there's the Honey token, which is a stable coin on the Berachain ecosystem. Okay, so how do these tokens work together to enable an ecosystem that's not just rewarding the chain security layer, but actually incentivizing them to support the growth of the network and to secure TVL on the network? Here's how that works. As a validator, you have to first go get the minimum amount of Bera needed in order to run a validator node. When you're running a validator node, the more Bera you stake, the higher the chance of you getting selected, the higher the probability of you getting selected to propose a block. In other words, more rewards will come for you. So there's an incentive for you to acquire more Bera and to be one of the largest validator nodes. Now, when you get selected to close a block, you earn rewards, but those rewards are not in the Bera token. Actually in a token called BGT, which is that second layer token. BGT stands for the Bera governance token. Bera governance token is not transferable. It's a soul-bound token. However, as part of the emissions, you can configure how that token is distributed. So some of it can come to you as the validator, but some of it will go to these things called reward vaults. And we'll talk about them in a second, because the reward vault emission, you selecting to send them to specific reward vaults, is part of what is supporting the liquidity on the chain. Third token that is available is, as we talked about, the honey token, which also connects to this liquidity provisioning layer. Let's come back to why would you emit some tokens to this thing called reward vault, and what exactly is a reward vault. Reward vaults are mechanisms that this is where that chain security layer, the chain operation layer connects. So reward vaults are mechanisms that allow that chain operation layer, in other words, application builders, DEXs, liquidity aggregators, lending and borrowing platforms, many other platforms of all kinds. It allows them to create these reward vaults in order to give an incentive to the validators who are in the chain security layer to send their emissions when the validators produce these blocks and earn BGT. You can incentivize them to send their emissions to your reward vault. So let's say I have a project and I want to receive the emissions from a validator. Why would I want to do that? Because I may want a lot of people to come use my application and lock liquidity on my application. Maybe I have a lending and borrowing app. Maybe I have a decentralized exchange. Maybe I have a yield farming app. Each one of those scenarios, I want a lot of people to come have TVL locked up on my platform. I can attract it by saying my platform has a reward vault that earns BGT from 1 to 3 validators, or even one validator. You can describe how much BGT you may earn. How are you convincing the validators to send you the BGT? Well, if you launch a platform in DeFi, I assume you have a token. That's typically how these things work. Let's call your token ABC token. So you may then use that ABC token in order to incentivize the validator, saying, if you send me your emissions, if you send me the BGT that you're earning for proposing blocks, then I will give you the ABC token in exchange. And you set a rate for this. So you may say 1 BGT, I may give you 100 ABC tokens as an example. And this process is called incentivizing the validator. The validator has an incentive that they will send some BGT to you. Remember, BGT, they cannot transfer, they cannot sell, they cannot market, they cannot trade. This ABC token that they're getting, they can trade. So this is how the validator is earning. In order for the validator to earn actual value, they have to participate and support projects and platforms on the network. How are they doing that? Again, they're producing blocks. They can take some of the rewards of that block. Proposing blocks, when they're selected to propose blocks, BGT is emitted. They can take some of that BGT, which can be transferred, and keep some of it for themselves. And then they configure some of it to go to these reward vaults. In exchange, they earn tokens that are transferable and tradable. They are incentive tokens by those platforms. BGT is received by the individuals of the platform. What do they do with it in the reward vault? They will share it with the users who are utilizing the platform. So now you see how that's connected too. From the chain security layer, the protocol and platform project builders, to the community who are the users of the platform. Users of the platform will be like, oh, I want to use this platform because when I use this platform for yield farming and I lock up my liquidity in there, not only am I earning some yield on the liquidity in their core application, I'm also going to be earning BGT that they will receive from validators because they are giving an incentive to the validators. This is just one loop of an example of how, in order for the validators to earn anything monetarily meaningful, they have to support projects and protocols building on the platform, on the chain, on Berachain itself. And the only way that those projects can succeed is by providing incentives and rewards to their users in the form of BGT rewards that they're getting from validators. In order to get those rewards from the validators, the projects provide to the validators liquid token, which is their project token. How do users get eligible to earn this BGT from the reward vault? This is where the liquidity part comes in. All of these reward vaults typically will require LP tokens in order to earn the rewards that are being provided to them in the form of BGT. So the whole cycle connects. Like, it is absolutely bonkers how they figured out to connect the native gas token of the chain with a token that is used for governance but is soul bound, and the only way that token can be used in order to benefit the validator is by supporting the ecosystem, and then they earn other liquid tokens in exchange. So an absolutely bonkers way of thinking about it, but it has clearly taken the DeFi world by storm and done tremendously well. And I'm just explaining one part of this loop. If you want me to take more time to dive deeper into these explanations or dive deeper into other projects in the ecosystem and highlight them, do let me know in the comments. And while you're at it, if you like this kind of content, do take a moment to like and even subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you're watching it there. If you're watching on X, liking and reposting and especially bookmarking videos like this really does help with the engagement and helps me and my team create more awesome content for you guys. I'm really excited about creating more content for Berachain, but we have one more thing to cover before we sort of wrap this section up, which is why should this matter to you? Why it should matter to you is because a lot of times in DeFi, we are sold the idea this next new chain, only to find out that a few months later, it is a ghost chain. As Raj was showing earlier, that got 80% of the chains with less than $50 million in TVL. It absolutely no activity. With this ecosystem and this approach of the proof of liquidity concept, what you are banking on is something that is designed for longevity, something that is designed to last. When you stake in a staking pool or a yield farming pool or any other ecosystem initiative that may require you locking your tokens for 3 months, 6 months, or a year, you are more likely to feel comfortable in this ecosystem because the incentives are aligned and the liquidity will remain there, and there will still be the ability to exit and enter different positions, as compared to other chains where if you lock something up for a year, the entire chain might not be liquid at that point except for the main token on centralized exchanges. So this is something very, very exciting. I'm excited to explore more about the Berachain ecosystem, and I can't wait to share all of that with you. If you liked the content that I've put together here, you might want to check out some of the other videos coming up on the screen now. Thank you so much again for tuning in and for watching my first video on Berachain. I'll be making a lot more, and ooga booga, everybody.